Hi guys, this is Drew from TheRadiogeeks. We're having a little play around with the IRCDDBgateway software today. I've heard a few people talking on air on various reflectors saying that they found it difficult to set the program up, how to actually configure the program. I also read on a couple of the forums that people were having difficulty with it as well. We use IRCDDBgateway on several systems. We have a 2-meter hotspot, we have a 70 SEMS duplex repeater, we have analog to digital gateways running it, we have DVAPs, DV boards, personal hotspots. We have a whole load of stuff that we run IRCDDBgateway on, so hopefully we'll get you covered in the next sort of 15-20 minutes and give you an idea of how we configure it. If you're not using IRCDDBgateway, it's a great software. It's provided by Jonathan Naylor G4KLX, and it runs alongside his DSTAR repeater or PC repeater controller software. Really is top notch. So if you've got a Raspberry Pi or a BeagleBone, anything like that, Raspberry Pi pulls about 5 watts all day long, and as you can see from the load meter down here, very low draw on resources. If you're running a Pi, the easiest way to grab this is to click the run, and in the dialog box type IRCDDBgateway Config and push the OK button. Once you've done that, you'll end up with this screen that we see here. It's built on a bunch of tabs, so you've got different tabs for different setups, repeater 1, repeater 2 through to 3 and 4. You can have 4 different modules running on any one install of IRCDDB. Our first tab is the Gateway tab. If we click here, it'll tell us what we're running. So are we running a repeater, a hotspot, or a dongle? Now I'm actually running with a DVAP on this particular install, so it's a hotspot. Call sign, quite obvious really. The gateway call sign goes in there. If you're running, as I am, with a DVAP, you'll put your own personal call sign in there. If you're running a repeater, or if you're running a gateway, then obviously the gateway call sign goes in there. The ICOM address is for the purposes if you're running with ICOM hardware, because this software will run with the ICOM repeater hardware. Our local ICOM port, again, if you're running with a DVAP or if you're running with a DV card, any of Jonathan's other bits and pieces, we don't need to worry about that. Our local address is the IP address of the computer the install is running on. So if we have instances where we're running over multiple computers, if we have IRCDDBgateway running on one machine and perhaps PC repeater running on another machine, then we would have the IP address. So this is the local address of the machine that's running IRCDDBgateway. So in this instance I'm running both softwares on the same PC, so I'm just going to use the IP address of 127.0.0.1. And as I say, if you're running over multiple machines, then you would put the IRCDDB machine IP address into this box. Your local port, well, that's port 20020. I think I've configured this slightly different from default, but you pretty much want to leave them the same. Latitude and longitude. Now this is for APRS. The software actually reports to APRS, so if you want to put your latitude and longitude in there and any QTH information that you would want to appear on any of the APRS ISs, then you can enter that there. And then finally you've got a URL, so if you're a group, you've got a website, put your website address in there. Again, it'll provide a link from APRS internet servers. So that's our first tab, the Gateway tab. Repeater 1 tab, this is where we enter our repeater information. Now, as you can see, we have quite a few to choose from. You've got a module, B module, C module, D and E. Now usually if we go by convention, there's no set rule this, but it's only by convention. We have A module is 23 SEMS, a B module is 70 SEMS, C module 2 meters, D module is 6 meters, and E module is 10 meters. So that's our that's our module stack. The other modules here are the same again, but running in full DSTAR data mode, so that's making use of the 128 kilobytes that's available under the DSTAR. So we're actually running with our DVAP, and it's 77's DVAP, so I'm going to select band B. Now we put on the type of repeater, so we've got a homebrew, which obviously is what I'm using. You've got a full ICOM stack, and then we've got dummy. Now the dummy repeater actually for use with DV dongles. So if you have a DV dongle, then select dummy, and then run it alongside Jonathan's dummy repeater. And we're going to cover the setup of dummy repeater and the DSTAR repeater in another segment. The address, again, this is the address now of the machine that's going to be running the repeater software. Again, as I've said, I'm using this one machine to run both the DVAP repeater and to run IRCDDBgateway, so I'm using the IP address of 127.0.0.1. If you have your repeater module running on a different machine, then you put its IP address in there, and we assign a port address, which in this instance is 222. Slightly different from default. You don't need to alter that. I only altered it because I'm using multiple instances of IRCDDB, and it made it a lot easier for me to use separate port addresses. And now we come to the reflector setup. When the software first starts, we can actually inform it to connect to any of the reflectors. So on startup, it'll automatically connect to any of the D+ reflectors, the XRF reflectors, the DCS reflectors. I don't actually use that because I use the remote control app to control the DVAP, or obviously connection from the radio. The startup state, so do we want it or do we not to start up in that state? Well, in my instance it's none. No, because I have none selected. If you wanted it to start up, you would put a yes in that box. The reconnect box, if someone was to take your repeater off your fixed startup to somewhere else where they wanted to go and listen, if there was no traffic on that repeater for whatever you set these time limits to, then it would move back and connect to your default reflector, which you have located up here. If there was no traffic on that actual reflector for any of these set period times, then it would come back, your system would come back and connect to its default. The second of the repeater 1 tabs again is for information regarding the location, the frequency, the offset used, the usable range of the reflector, and again this is all reporting to Aprs internet servers. This is ever so slightly different from the gateway setting because obviously IRCDDBgateway is an internet connected device, so you could have your IRCDDBgateway running in one location and you can have your repeaters running over a different location. So if you had a central hub for IRCDDB and you had your repeaters on multiple hilltops, you can assign various latitudes and longitudes to report to the Aprs internet servers. Here's repeater 2. So as I say, I'm only using this particular system with the 77's DVAP, so I haven't got any other modules connected. But if you had a C module on 2 meters, you would allocate that here. Again, homebrew, because we'd be using it with Jonathan's DSTAR repeater. The IP address that the computer that module was running on. The port number, now these are the default ports, so I think the default ports on the gateway were 210, on repeater 1 it was 211, 212, 213, etc. You've got the reflector startups again. You could have this one connect to 1 Charlie, you could have your second module connect to 30 Charlie. Yeah, it's entirely up to yourselves to configure, but as I say, I'm not actually running multiple repeaters on this this install. So we're going to breeze through repeater 2, exactly the same as our repeater 1, frequency, offset, usable range, location information for APRS, internet services. Repeater 3, again, a third module, its location, its frequency, its offset. Repeater 4's offsets. So we now move to the IRCDDB tab itself. As I say, I'm using IRCDDB at the moment with a DVAP, so it's running under a personal call sign. Now you can't connect to IRCDDB servers on a personal call sign. You have to run either a club call if you're in the US, or if you're in the UK, as I am, you would need to run the GB7 repeater call or an MB6 gateway call. So whatever your notice of variation on your license, whatever your application says the call sign is, then you could run on that. So you apply to IRCDDB, you get a username, which is usually the call sign, and you get a password, and then you can connect to the IRCDDB servers. I have it disabled, as I say. I'm running under a personal call, but so you enable it. You then tell it what server you want it to use. So Group 1 servers, the Europe, Group 2 servers, UK, and then we got a whole host of test servers where you could connect under your own personal call sign, but of course you would only be able to talk to persons that are also on that same server. The DPRS, so this is our Aprs Digital tab. Again, I have it disabled because I don't really want to be sending my home position over and over again to Aprs FI. So if you enable it, if you've got any of the radios with a GPS module, then every time you key up, you'll be sending your info to the Aprs internet servers, the host name of the Aprs server you want to use, and of course the port number for that Aprs server. So that's our digital Aprs. So the next three tabs, if I move along a little, are our network connections. There's basically three different network servers that run within DSTAR. You have our DXtra connections. As you see, I have it enabled here. Now this allows us connections to the XRF X reflectors. It also allows me to configure the inbound connections. So if I wanted someone to connect to me on an inbound connection, maybe they wanted to route from their gateway or their repeater to my actual hotspot to give me a call, I can configure here how many connections I can take at any one time. If you've got the bandwidth, then obviously you can have as many connections as you want. I'm keeping it in the middle ground there at the moment. So that's our DXtra X reflector connections. Our D plus connections, again, enable that if you want to talk to the RAF D plus. If you don't enable these networks, then obviously you won't be able to use those connections. So you won't be able to, if your D plus was disabled, you wouldn't be able to route to any of the RAF type reflectors. Maximum dongles inbound, so we're going to use middle ground again. I'm going for 3. Our login call sign, you have to register yourself for the D plus network. So I'm not going to cover that. There's a whole bunch of videos out there showing you guys how to connect and register to D plus or for D plus use. The system administrator's call sign is usually used on a D plus. They don't like you using the gateway call sign or the repeater call sign. Of course you can do that, but it's ever so slightly frowned upon. So now we come to DCS and CCS. Again, these are network connections. You connect to DCS and CCS servers. So again, I have it enabled. I have our CCS connections enabled, and in CCS it actually asks me which server I want to talk to. Well, in UK we use server 4. no doubt you could probably Google around and find that information for your relative country. So that covers the network connections, and now we're looking at Starnet connections. I'm not going to go into too much detail with Starnet. Again, there are quite a few useful YouTube videos around that tells you all about Starnet, but essentially it's a multi-group linking system. So you can throw a call sign at your hotspot, your repeater, using your UR commands or your radio, and it will enable you to link to a group, a DSTAR group. I think that's probably the best way for me to describe that. Again, not going into too much detail, but that's our Starnet 1, Starnet 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are 5 different Starnet configurations that you can use there for 5 different groups, 5 different user groups. So it's essentially a talk channel. You can do a simple key up if you were moving from one location to another. If you're moving from one repeater to another repeater, once you drop out of coverage of the previous repeater, your next repeater, you just throw it that UR command and you're linked back in. You automatically directly link back into the same group. So for people on the move, it's probably worth looking at. But myself, as I said, this is a DVAP, so it's a home system. So I've not got into the Starnet groups too much. Now the remote. If you want to use the remote control app as shown here on the desktop, or if you want to use the IRCDDBgateway Control application that's written for iPhone and Android, and this is your configuration for that. You enable it or disable it, you give yourself a password, and then you run a inbound port where that connection is looking to in your router. So that's the remote tab. Our miscellaneous tab, we set up the language of IRCDDB gateway. So this controls the GUI, essentially what you're looking at. So this will be configured in your language. I believe it also controls the voice prompts and voice announcements you get as well. Info command, again, enable or disable. This gives you the ability to throw the I command at the gateway of the repeater, and it will come back to you in a voice prompt to tell you what you're linked to. So essentially you use 7 spaces and the I character in your UR field. You key your radio, it tells you where you're linked or where you're not linked. The echo command, again, a simple enable or disable. We use 7 spaces and an E character in our UR command field. Key up, talk to the repeater. A couple seconds after you dekey, it'll actually send your audio back to you. It'll replay it back over air, give you an idea of how you're hitting the repeater, or how you've got your mic gain set on your radio, that sort of thing. The logging within the program, I'm using a Raspberry Pi with an SD card, so it's probably not advisable to have that enabled for 2 reasons. 1, it's limited storage, and 2, if you're continually writing every minute of every day to your SD card, you're soon going to wear that card out. DRATs, we haven't covered DRATs. DRATs is a messaging over DSTAR file transfer, FTP, that sort of thing, which can run alongside IRCDDB gateway. So for you guys who want to do your MCOM sort of things, definitely worth looking at DRATs. You can do file transfers, messaging, what have you. Some very interesting things actually on DRATs, so I suggest you go and have a look at that. Just plug DRATs into your favourite video hosting website. Right, now we come to the Dtmf control. Again, it's a simple disable or enable action. I've enabled it. It allows you to control the linking via DTMF on your radio keypad. So IRCDDB does allow you to control your linking. Also controls the status, and the disconnect commands under single DTMF characters. So nice little shortcut if you're running IRCDDB and you have one of the radios with the DTMF keypads on them. Once we have our configuration, we click File, we click Save. It gives us a little prompt to say that the changes won't be put into effect until we rerun the software. Click the OK button, and that's our system configured. So we File, Exit, and go back and rerun IRCDDBgateway, and you should find that it's now configured for use with one of Jonathan's other applications. So we'll look at those applications another time, but for the minute there's a short little video showing you how to configure IRCDDBgateway.